how do dragons see themselves? They see themselves as godly people, adequately gracious and kind, who hold another viewpoint they honestly believe is right. Simple. And they, like you, don't want anything but the best for the church. Okay, now that being the case, why is it then that they always seem to wind up doing battle? Or that you wind up doing battle with them? How do you get into these situations? As I've said before, most of the time you're in it before you have any idea that it's there. The answer is really relatively simple. Maybe I can illustrate it this way. Have you ever experienced a situation where a problem arose and you approach it with reason and with logic and with just trying to understand the situation, and you explain and explain and prove and explain, and you basically solve the problem? In one sense of the word, you can back a person into a corner. He has to own up to the fact that everything you say is true, and you have solved the problem. Only to find out a little bit later that suddenly you have another problem with the same person. Now tell me, if you can, what has happened here, and how you go from there to explain why it is that people who are godly people and gracious and kind, who just simply hold another viewpoint they believe is right, how it is we get into these situations with them. Anybody got any suggestions? Any ideas? Nobody does. Chris?
You may seem like you've solved the problem in that you have won a battle, but you have not solved the person. And from the standpoint that there is underlying a source, which is not necessarily what they're throwing out at you.
That's right.
And so you have to really understand the person, find out what his motivation is, and find a useful channel in which to direct it.
Absolutely right. Yes, Tom?
Usually, a lot of times, problems are really imaginary. Even though one problem will surface, or you think that is the problem, but it really isn't. It's something else that's bothering the person, and usually, and many times, it's really imaginary, and it's hard to come by and hard to reach. So therefore, one problem after another will keep surfacing, but it's not the real problem.
What would the real problem possibly be? Why is it that it doesn't get to the surface?
Many times even the person does not even know, really. Cannot sit down and intelligently tell you what the problem is.
I think it comes into focus when you understand that the reason why people do battle about a given item in the church, if you think about it, what is it that would motivate you to get into an argument or a fight with somebody about something? Is it logic? Is it reason? Or is it feelings? Don't you have to feel very strongly about something before you will do battle over it? Okay. Then if you meet all of the logical requirements, if you answer all the rational objections, and if you win the argument at the intellectual level, but the emotional need has not been met, then start preparing for the next battle. Because the whole thing grows out of an emotional need in the individual's concern. Now, emotions are very complex, and the things that motivate people to do things are very complex. But Shelley brings out that it often comes about from a feeling of neglect or isolation. A lot of times they are not so much judging you as they are mad at you. And when you solely deal with the issue from an intellectual point of view, without dealing with the anger that is there, all you do is wind up, say, backing somebody into a corner and winning the argument, but you have accomplished nothing toward the resolution of the long-standing permanent problem, which will continue to fester and could eventually become an enormously serious problem. So you have to realize right off the bat that what you are dealing with is feelings, not facts. You are dealing with emotions, not quantifiable arguments or debatable issues that can be dealt with. And knowing that, is at least a good long step down the road toward being able to deal with it effectively in the process. Now, another thing you also need to realize is they may not be mad at you. They may just have a sore tail about something that's happened somewhere else, and they're spouting off. And this is something here that's an issue that they can address and a circumstance where they can address it. But unless you take the time to find out, and unless you start inquiring into how they feel, you may never find that out. So simply addressing the questions and the issues may not be the way to go. And one little question that you need to always keep in your repertoire when you're dealing with people like this is the question, how do you feel about whatever it may be? How do you feel? What is your feeling? Because that is where you're going to begin to get down to fundamentals with some of these things. Now, there are different ways in which these problems, these feelings will manifest themselves. One is personal attacks. A personal attack on you as a minister. We are enormously vulnerable, as I have already pointed out. One of the quotes that he used in his booklet was, "Resolve that all men should live for the glory of God. Resolve, second, that whether others do or not, I will." This is one of the hardest things that you have got to get, to understand and really get a grip on. And hardest to do is when all sorts of people around you are no longer acting for the glory of God and are no longer following the leadership of God's Spirit. It is still critical and still essential, if you're going to make it into God's kingdom even, that you do. Chris? I just caught him out of the corner of my eye there. All right, the first point then is when attacked by a dragon, when the personal attack does come, do not become one. Don't become a dragon yourself. Don't respond in kind. Watch out for the PRA syndrome. Now, this is mine, not Shelley's. It's provocation, reaction, accusation. Provocation, reaction, accusation. It is probably the way in which most of us come a cropper from time to time when we're dealing with these situations in the church. Ted was talking about it recently, and he drew the analogy of the incident at Kent State some years ago when a number of students burned down the ROTC armory. Provocation. Reaction, send out the National Guard. The National Guard were on campus. The next day, students are throwing rocks and bottles at the National Guard. Provocation. Reaction, the National Guard opened fire and killed a few students. Followed by accusation against the National Guard. Now, I really sympathize with those students and with their families. And I really think that some of the students who were hurt actually were not among the provocateurs in the situation. But isn't it stupid to provoke a man with a loaded rifle with a bayonet on the end of it in his hand? Isn't it stupid? How in the world can anyone who provokes in that situation complain and accuse as a result of the reaction? But it does. It happens. And it's exactly the way it goes. I wish I had a nickel for every time I had seen that happen in the Church of God International to a minister, to where there is a provocation, the minister reacts, and then he's accused of acting in an unchristian fashion. Because you see, the person who is doing this can choose his time, can choose his place, can choose the circumstances. The battlefield is his choice. The timing is his choice. And he can even choose not to move, not to act, not to do it at a given time because it doesn't feel right to him at that point in time. And so what will oftentimes happen, and even though I don't believe very many people ever sit down and deliberately do so, they couldn't be any more effective if they did. The time or the place is chosen, the provocation is given, and before the minister even knows what he has done, he reacts to the situation. It's almost, it's really kind of predictable. And you see, these people have hours and hours of sitting and listening to you preach to analyze you and come to know you as a person. They can watch you talking with people after church. So they subconsciously or consciously are building a huge dossier of how you work. And it doesn't take very long before any man in this room, that any thoughtful person could come to an awareness there will be a time when I can get him and cause him to blow up. Not a man in this room that's vulnerable, or a woman for that matter, that someone watches you carefully enough, spends their time and plans it out, cannot cause you to blow up, and there are some people who can do it instinctively. They just seem to know how it's done. They don't think about it. They don't plan it. They don't even necessarily want it. They just do it, and it's done, and then they never accept the responsibility for it. It's your fault because you blew up. Shelley points out, he says, oftentimes the greatest damage is done not by the dragon, but by the reaction he provokes in the pastor. And that has been a pattern that has been repeated several times in the Church of God International. It's happened to ministers who are good men, they're kind men, they mean the best for the church, they're trying their best to do a very hard job, and the first thing they know, somebody's got them boxed in and just happened to get them where the nerve was at just the precise right moment in time, until he blows up and says, all right, that's it, and provocation, reaction, and then guess who gets accused? And guess who's expected to apologize? And chances are he owes everybody an apology as far as that's concerned, because he shouldn't have blown up. Now, I sit down, Tyler, and I get all the letters that come rolling in because the minister blew up. You know, he did this and he said that, and that's all very unchristian. And I sit there and I read them and just shake my head. Because, you know, I know all you guys, you know, and I know your heart's right. And I know you want nothing but the best for the church. And I know how easy it is for somebody to box you out, you know, or outmaneuver you because you're vulnerable and they're not. So I always take it with a grain of salt when it comes down my way. I don't try, react to it, against you. I'm telling you this right now because you really need to understand that even though the people are not trying to do it to you, somebody is. And I don't know if that somebody is the devil and people are unwitting pawns in his hands. I'm reluctant to say that. Because it seems to me that human beings can create enough damage by themselves without any help from the devil at all. And I think we give him way too much credit. The point is, though, that you need to understand that you cannot afford to compound the damage done by a dragon in the church by allowing yourself the luxury of blowing up. Just can't do it. I've got a temper. You've got a temper. But you've got to realize it will be tried, and you can almost count on it. It will be at the worst possible time. So if you know, and if you realize it can come, and if you realize that you don't have to say anything, you can actually just stand there and look the person right in the eye and say not one word. You don't have to say anything. Sometimes you don't actually want to say anything until the next day, or maybe next week, before you ever comment on some things. The dragon may have his way. Your job is to live Jesus Christ's way, regardless of whether he gets his way or not. Chris, that time you did have your hand up.
I remember when I faced this some years ago, I resolved it in my mind in a way that might be helpful to others. I found that a lot of the injury or the tendency to overreact is that we assume that the person who is doing this to us is a brother in Christ, and we are expecting from them a Christian action. And the way I resolved it is that I never expect Christian action from anybody, and I always treat everybody as if they're unconverted. And remember that always I have to be converted. And if we don't expect this type of, in other words, if we don't expect the right behavior towards us, but are expecting that we're dealing with somebody that just like anybody out in the world, then I think that blunts it an awful lot and is a helpful tool in not overreacting to the situation.
I really do, and I think it reminds me really of some things I've seen elsewhere, and particularly in the book "Stop You're Driving Me Crazy." I forget the author's name, in which he discusses the phenomenon of crazy making in which people engage, which has to do with fractured expectations. You create expectations, and then the expectations are distorted or don't come to fruition, and your response to that oftentimes is, this person is driving me crazy. And it is because you have expected something, one thing of them, and you got something else. And, of course, history seems to give a bias in favor of the negative person. The person who anticipates the worst out of people is less often disappointed than the person who expects the best. That's natural. It works that way. And our nature as ministers is to expect the best. We tend to look that way, and we get terribly disappointed when we don't get it. But, see, what happens a lot of times is that we set these real high goals for people, and we assume that they're already ready to measure up to them, and they're really not. Just like they set these real high goals for the minister, and they assume that you're already ready to measure up to them. And you're not. Not much better than they are, as a matter of fact, sometimes. And that's where a lot of the difficulty comes from. Who is there among your congregation or among your acquaintances in the church that you fear? No, I'm not afraid of anybody, right? Well, is there anybody who seems to put a bit of pressure on you in a meeting more than other people do? Is there anybody that when you get up to speak, you can find yourself looking out of the corner of your eye at them to see how they might be taking what it is you're saying? They had some interesting illustrations in the book of men who because of the criticisms of their speaking that they were getting from people in their congregation, got to where they were tying up themselves up into a knot every time as they began to prepare their sermon. And they got up there and their mouth went dry, and they kept looking over at this family and seeing a deep scowl or something on their face, and they began to worry about them. Well, Shelley puts it this way. He says, it is almost impossible to love people you fear. Almost impossible to love people you fear. We help no one by allowing dragons in the church to just wreak destruction, among people without even trying to check them. And we should not meekly bow before dominant personalities. If there are people in the congregation who are creating apprehension in you and creating a problem of, maybe fear is too strong a word, but if the instant you recognize that, it is something you have got to deal with, because it will tear up your ministry and it will adversely affect the church. And you must not allow people like this who intimidate, and that is exactly what is going on, to not only intimidate you, but to intimidate other people in the church without somehow meeting what is going on. Be careful, however, to choose your time and your issues very carefully, because if you don't, you will become the overlord, and the dragon will become the underdog, and it can happen so fast it will make your head swim. Dragons are incredibly skilled at becoming underdogs and appearing to be underdogs. They can provoke you. They can generate a serious negative reaction from you, and a reaction of hostility, and all of a sudden be whining, and whip dog, and have everybody in the church feeling sorry for them and looking at you and saying, how could you do this poor little old lady? It can happen faster than you'd ever imagine, and it could happen. One of the illustrations, too, of this I wanted to be sure to mention to you about choosing your time and your place. There will come a time in your ministry when it's going to be necessary for you to remove a man from the speaking schedule. There may be any number of reasons why you're going to feel you have to do that. There have been a couple of situations in different church areas that have happened. In fact, I think it's happened more than 2 times over the past couple of years. Ministers have called me about the situation with men in their church who have begun in sermonettes to drift into not just merely a single sermonette that was unsound, but a series maybe or several sermonettes that were unsound. My advice to you is whenever that takes place, meet the issue right then and right there on the issue of the content of the sermonette. Why would I say that? Any guesses? Not real obvious yet. Charles? You want to attack the problem. If you wait around until something else comes up, you may be forced into addressing the issue on the wrong battleground at the wrong time about the wrong things and wind up with egg on your face. You can always defend removing a man from the speaking schedule for unsound doctrine. It is one of the most defensible things you can do. So if people start speaking in the church, your best bet is to say, look, I listened to that sermonette, I went through it, and maybe be sure you got your example straight, and say, I'm going to have to take you off the schedule for a while. I think you need to develop more as a student of the Bible and to clarify certain concepts in the church in your mind. And I hope that before too many months have gone by, you'll be able to be back. But for now, I have to take you off. Now, it may be that whoever it is will scream bloody murder at that time. But if he sends all these letters down to me and Tyler, if he makes all sorts of issues out of it, and he says, well, he took me off the speaking schedule and he's unfair, and you come back and say, okay, in a sermonette on this date, he taught this. In a sermonette on that date, he taught the other. Then all I have got to do is say, is that true? And it would be pretty tough to deny it if he said in front of the whole congregation. And I can say, I'm sorry, he was justified in taking you off the list. That is not church doctrine. But if you skip over that and you try to look for a more gentle way of moving a guy off the church, speaking list, he will probably outmaneuver you and leave you with egg on your face. Choose your issue. And when you have a right one and you know you're right and it's absolutely defensible, move now. Do not let it wait. Because if you do, you will be forced to join the issue in a much more unfortunate and uncomfortable circumstance later on. Any of you faced that problem by any chance? See a couple of heads nodding, so okay, we have seen that take place. Do not expose yourself, also, in this matter of dealing with it, do not expose yourself to attack unnecessarily. Share responsibility. Already I talked to you about the pastor with the building program and the absolute impossibility of pleasing everybody in the church with decorations and architectural designs and so forth. Share responsibility. Give certain responsibilities to other people. Sermonettes you've got to deal with. But there are many things in the church you can go to your church council and say, look, Mr. So-and-so is having a problem. His attitude really is not what it ought to be. I wonder if a couple of you guys could go talk to him about it. Don't expose yourself unnecessarily on issues especially that there are very well qualified, mature, sometimes elderly people in the congregation who can sit down with a younger man and be respected and dealt with. Sometimes they can accomplish things that you can't accomplish because he's already got feelings about you. So use other people in your church to help you and stay out of the crossfire in all these areas. And I would say more than one Church of God International minister has gotten shot at by getting into areas that he did not need to be involved in or by forcing issues in no-win situations. Forcing issues in no-win situations. Forcing an issue is a bad phrase. The Bible says the wringing of the nose brings forth blood. Leave off strife before it be meddled with. Before you force an issue, sit down and think about it a long time and get on the phone and call and talk to a fellow minister about it, but don't call the man who is most likely to agree with you. Maybe right now when your thoughts are clear and cool, you ought to make yourself a list of people that you can call for advice in the ministry. And make a list of those most likely to agree with you and those who are not so likely to agree with you but will be understanding. Call those men. Get some advice. Talk to them before you ever force an issue. Because that's where an awful lot of our troubles have come from, when a minister really could have left it alone and no serious harm would have been done. Some minor inconvenience, some small issue, some little trivial thing. He tried to win in a tactical situation and moved himself into an untenable strategic situation. Don't fight battles you don't have to fight. That's as simple as that. The other aspect of the way this thing comes apart from personal attacks, which I've been talking about, is the play for power. And this is not a matter of anybody being upset with you personally. It really boils down to a question of who's going to call the shots here. A couple of interesting quotes. To see that my adversary gives me my rights is natural. But from our Lord's standpoint, it does not matter if I am defrauded or not. What matters is that I do not defraud. That is profound. You would think, well, God cares about whether I get defrauded or not. I suppose you could say He does care. But another way, this statement, it does not matter from the Lord's standpoint if I am defrauded or not, is very close to the truth. That's not what's important. If it were, He wouldn't let it happen to us so much. If it were really critical, God would not let Christians get defrauded, and we are defrauded a whole bunch, aren't we, in this world? So I can only conclude it doesn't matter. From His point of view, whether we are defrauded or not, what matters very much to Him is that we do not defraud. Second quote, you may be able to compel people to maintain certain minimum standards by stressing duty But the highest moral achievements depend not on a push, but on a pull. People must be charmed into righteousness. So, charming people, not forcing the issue. Now, when we get down to these situations where there is a play for power going on the church, as Shelley rather puts it charmingly, he said, there is no Geneva Convention in this war. There isn't any set of rules that everybody abides by or must abide by. The problem, simply stated, is this, and this is something that I think you need to address early on in your ministry and early on in any church. Most church members see themselves as nice people who are willing to bend to keep the peace. They want peace. They want unity. And they'll bend and they'll give a little here and there, and they'll sometimes even bend over backwards, and they'll compromise in a lot of cases, and they'll negotiate in order to keep the peace. This gives, in the very state of things, in a Christian church even by the name of Christian, but certainly among any group of people who are for the most part Christians, this gives enormous leverage to those hard-nosed people who are willing to make a public scene. It may even give them control. Think about that. There are always some people, they don't care about making a public scene. They'll make an absolute total scene. They'll scream and yell. Do you suppose it's because they get taught that when they're children? That they learn when they're children, if they'll make a public scene, that someone will give them what they want in order to shut them up. And do we grow up making a public scene in order to get our way? Well, all I know is that you do have that goes on among Christian people. That there are those who will make the scene, and they do get their way because they make a scene, because the rest of the people don't want to get involved in a fight, and they say, well, it's easier to give him his way than it is to fight with him. These people think that being right is more important than being nice. They make absolutes out of issues that other people will see as negotiable. But a healthy church doesn't let one or two members set the direction of the church. So you have got to deal with that problem. Hopefully you can deal with it to some extent before it ever becomes an issue, before it is actually beginning to happen. Some form of sermon, some form of admonition, a Bible study, some work through the Proverbs, whatever else it may be. But another thing you have got to help all your people to understand, as well as those willing to make a public scene, that there is a time when those people in the church have got to face into the wind. That sooner or later they got to face into the wind right alongside of you, and you have got to face down those people who would change the direction of the church, and they've got to come to understand that you cannot be expected to do it by yourself. It's up to you to teach those people that. They have got to come to understand that you cannot be expected to do it alone, that they've got to be willing to stand with you when the time comes. And you've got to prepare for that before the time comes along the way. Face into the wind. That is your first task whenever it starts to blow. Don't dodge it. Don't go away from it. Face into it. But choose your time, choose your place, and never become a dragon yourself in the process of it. As Napoleon put it, never let your enemy choose the battleground. If he's got a reason for wanting the battle to be fought here, you must have a reason for not wanting it. Otherwise, he wouldn't have chosen it. Even if you don't even know what it is. Try not to let your enemy, he said, choose the battleground. Don't just get blown into it. Don't get trapped into it. This is what I mean by, when you got a man that's preaching heresy in the church, go talk to him and take him off the speaking schedule. It is as simple as that. That is your obligation. Face into the wind. If you don't, he will choose the battleground, and you will be at an enormous disadvantage. So take those warnings when they come, and with great kindness and love and compassion, and with the support of your local church council, go do your duty. Now, that brings me to the question of being sure you use that church council. Because even though we have made a distinction between the duties of a local church council and the duties of a minister, we have also said that they are to cooperate with one another in taking care of their various duties. One of the things the local church counselor must do is back their minister in areas of spiritual matters in the church where a conflict starts existing, or you're dead. Not only are you dead, they are dead. When it comes down to it, before you go to that man about that sermonette, you probably should go talk to a couple of your council members about it beforehand and tell them what you are going to do. Because if they understand it and they don't get blindsided, see what's happening, you take the guy off of the list. In fact, it may even be wise for you to take a witness with you when you do it. if that's what you're going to have to do. For the simple reason, you'll go in and sit down with him and you'll give him your reasons for taking him off the list. He will then go to the members of the church council and he will give them a set of reasons totally different from the one you gave. He will describe your motives totally differently from what they were. That would never happen, would it? You all know it would happen. History gets rewritten just like that. It isn't that those people are lying. It's after they leave you, they go home and they lie awake half the night explaining to themselves why they were right after all. And that means they've got to decide why you were wrong after all. And so by morning, they've rewritten all this in their minds, and they are now telling the truth as they see it to a whole new set of people. So it's a good idea to take a witness along with you, because people are not nearly so prone. You may never need him. Chances are the presence of the witness will forego the fact of ever needing him, because his mere presence there means I can't go into these people and tell them that, because old Joe was there right alongside the minister and he heard every word of it. So as I rewrite my history, I've got to rewrite it with Joe in mind, who's sitting over there twiddling his thumbs just taking all this conversation in. So don't hesitate in some situations like that when you do have to face into the wind to take a witness. Prevent, if you can, church fights from becoming holy wars. Now, what Shelley means by this essentially is that you try to make people realize that it's okay to disagree. Because if they don't feel that it's all right to disagree within the church, if they feel guilty about disagreements, then what they have to do is decide that this issue upon which you and I disagree is big enough to warrant the way I feel. Do you follow me? I've got to make this into more than it is in order to justify the fact that I feel this way. Whereas, if it's all right to disagree, if disagreeing on points while we agree on the ultimate directions of the church and the well-being of the church, if that disagreements on these points is accepted as a part of our way of life, then I have no need to make them into anything other than what they are. Simple disagreements among people of goodwill. But if it is not all right to disagree, then the result of that oftentimes is that disagreements, what were just minor fights, become holy wars in the church. Avoid the temptation to justify your fights by casting them as spiritual battles. Most of the time, there's nothing spiritual about it. Nothing spiritual about it. So don't recast them as spiritual battles, and try to help other people not to do it either. Next point is learn what you can from the opposition. The temptation to get mad is greater when you have not done your homework. Think about it. When you're not really ready, you're not prepared, you haven't really done your homework, you haven't all got it all up to snuff, you're much more inclined to get angry at somebody who puts you on the spot. And, of course, it's just a whole lot easier to put you on the spot. So when you know you got somebody in there who is going to create a problem, and usually you've got at least a hint of it, learn what you can from those people and learn it as early as you can. Because the more you understand them, the more you understand about what they want, where they're going, and what they're trying to do, the better you have done your homework. Know what's going on. And it's very important, too. People in the church who disagree with you can be some of the most important people in the church to you. Eisenhower, for example, has said would not make a tactical decision until he found somebody who strongly opposed it. The most dangerous situation a battlefield commander can be in is having everybody on his staff in total agreement that what they're about to do is right. You need somebody who says, hey, I think you're making a mistake, and here's why, so he can evaluate the possible negatives. It's not good to have everybody in total agreement about everything all the time anyway. You need someone who's got the backbone to stand up to you, and not to resist you or fight you, but to stand up to you and say, I think you're wrong this time. Let me tell you why. A man like that is worth his weight in gold. A man who will come to you right eyeball to eyeball, face to face, and say, I honestly think you're wrong this time. I may be wrong too. Let's talk. Another thing you need to realize and remember is that failure is not fatal. It is just flat not necessary for you to win every battle. It could get to the place where you even had to say, well, look, I can no longer serve this church. The situation is such that I don't feel I'm effective, and you may have to resign as that church's pastor. Doesn't mean your ministry is over. Not by a long shot. You can carry right on serving those people who do need you and who do want you, without having to feel that you have to serve this particular group of people, where maybe you lost the battle. It can happen. And, of course, there's nothing you can do once it has come to that place, but you must be very careful that whatever else other people have done, you continue to do what is right. Now, how would you go about dragon-proofing a church? What's your best defense against letting this type of thing? As one of the quotes in the book said, with the right spirit, a clumsy church structure will work. Without the right spirit, an ideal structure won't work. See, we tend to go charging off trying to get our structures right, getting our organization right, getting our methodology down. Whereas in truth, what we really need to be working on is that right spirit, that right attitude. Because when the people have got that, the worst kind of church organization will work. Recognize in the process of doing this that some people, even some ministers, enjoy fighting, and honestly determine if you're one of those people. You know, there are people, they like a fight, like nothing better than a good fight, good argument. That's a real blessing, I guess, for a man and his wife if they get married, for them both to be of that temperament. Because the worst thing in the world that can happen to you is be a person that hates to fight married to a person that loves to fight. You know, far worse, you know, than being married to a person, you know, having to both people who like to fight. Better, neither one of them do. But I don't know whether it's a personality characteristic, if it's something some of us just have, but there are combative, competitive people. And you need to understand sometimes if that's what you're dealing with, because sometimes they're not really fighting for the issue. The issue is only what happens to be there for the moment because they enjoy the cut and thrust of competitiveness, and they got to compete about something. When attacked by somebody in that kind of situation, it's easy to react by retaliation, or at least, or just refusing to compromise and saying to yourself, and here's the famous words, famous last words. It's the principle of the thing. You know, I'm not going to give in. It's the principle of the thing. I'm just not going to let that go. So you react in that way. But the fact is that when you let yourself get into an adversarial posture, anytime you say, okay, I'm going to let myself become an adversary in this battle that's going on here, you're dead, and I'll tell you why. As Shelley puts it, and he's dead right, almost any congregation is capable of producing more dragons than any minister can ever slay. So you set out to slay dragons, you have an unending, never-ending job ahead of you, and one that you are not going to enjoy. So, your conduct and your plans and your looking to the future should be structured in such a way as to keep you out of adversarial positions. Don't let yourself become an adversary. We need you to be above those fights. We need you to be the honest broker. We need you to be the person that people trust and say, Mr. So-and-so is not an adversary. You know, he is honest in this position. He is objective, and we can go to him and he can hear us and he'll tell us which way to go. But you see what can happen before you know it. You are one of the adversaries, and then they're expecting me to fly out from Tyler and come up here and do what you ought to be doing. And that's sorting out the difficulties among brethren. But before you knew it, you got roped in as an adversary. On one side or the other of a dispute happens before you even know it. Be very careful about that one. When people come to you about problems with other people in the church, what you need to understand is they may be on a recruiting mission. They may be trying to recruit you into their cause and take away from you one of the most valuable things you've got as their minister. Your reputation for being fair and objective and impartial. Don't lose it. Once you've lost it, you may not ever be able to get it back. It's pretty tough. So stay out of those fights. Encourage in your church a positive atmosphere. And begin with yourself. Now, there's some very specific things that you need to do in this regard. One is by praising the congregation's strengths. You know, take a look at them and see what is it these people really are exceptionally good at. What are their strengths? Praise them. Build them up. Talk about them. Because people respond far better to praise. And if you praise somebody for doing something, they want to do it again. You praise them for having an attitude, and they want to display it even more. You praise them, and they will tend to emphasize those areas where they are strong, and a peculiar thing will happen. The more they do those things that they are good at, the more they will crowd out those things that are problems, because they will not have the time for them, or the energy, or maybe even the inclination to get involved in them. Secondly, you encourage this positive atmosphere by enjoying and taking pride in the diversity among church members. Nothing more boring than being around a bunch of people that are all alike and all think alike and all agree about everything that comes along. That's dull, dull, dull. Who wants it? That isn't what Paul's talking about when he talks about one Lord, one faith, one baptism. That's not what he's talking about when you all be of the one mind and of one spirit. He's talking about the fact that you and I can disagree intensely about certain methodologies, but we are of one mind, that we are both looking for the best for the church, and that's all we want. So we are of one mind, even when we are in disagreement. By the third way of encouraging this positive atmosphere is by thanking critics, at least initially, for their candor and their concern. I really appreciate the fact that you're concerned, and I also consider it a gesture of confidence that you felt free to be candid with me. You know, it's very, if somebody comes to you and they can really tell it to you like it is, they are saying, I know that you're not going to reach out and lash out at me because I tell it to you straight. That's a compliment for people to be candid. Thank them for it. Number 4, in this matter of encouraging a positive atmosphere, you do this by assuming that anything uncomplimentary you say to anyone will be repeated. And trusting very few people, maybe your wife, and maybe one mature, trusted, long-standing colleague that you know will not drop it accidentally in conversation. Those people, you can trust them with your private criticisms and suspicions, but no one else. You can say it to somebody in private, and the next thing you know, it will come back to haunt you from somebody somewhere, and it will always be at the worst possible time and the worst possible place. Next, you can do it by being slow to step into other people's problems. Slow to step into other people's problems. And never forget, when a problem exists over here, it is their problem. It's their problem. And one of the most useful phrases that I've picked up in recent years is the old, well, what do you propose to do about it? It's kept me out of a lot of irritating games of why don't you, yes, but. I say, well, how about trying this? Well, yes, but if I do that, then he'll say, and they'll go on about that. I say, well, okay, then let's try this. Well, I've tried that, and that didn't work because, well, let's try it. And you go on for a while, whereas I found that if all I do is I say, what do you propose to do about it? Well, what do you think should be done about it? What do you want to do about it? I don't want to ask them necessarily what do you think should be done because they're going to think I ought to do something about it. And as soon as you get that out of them, then you're in a position to, if they got the wrong angle, to explain, well, I think maybe you're not looking at this right. And here's why. But more often than not, when you ask people what they think they should do about it, they will tell you, and it will be right. It will be right. And you can say, I think you're right. I think that's what you ought to do. And just send them right on their way to take care of their problem. Don't ever forget, it's their problem, not yours. When you make it yours, the next thing you know, you'll be right in the middle of the battle. You'll be a participant. You'll be an adversary to somebody, and you're in trouble. Whereas if you can stay out of their fight and their problems, you can be effective. Next, you can do this positive or keep this positive atmosphere going by not being defensive. All questions and all criticisms do not have to be answered. You get defensive and you feel like you got to explain things away. Pretty soon the negativism starts creeping in. Sometimes it's enough to say, well, I really appreciate your coming to me and talking to me about that. I'll give it serious consideration. And that's all you need to say. Just leave it at that. You start defending it, you start explaining yourself, you're already in trouble. Sometimes it just doesn't need it. Just say, I'll think about it. Personify joy and generosity. Try to be a happy person, a cheerful person, giving person. Set a good example in that regard and encourage your congregation to do the same thing. Look for this positive atmosphere. And one of the things he mentioned, I think, which is tremendously important, is to employ people. As he put it, unemployment breeds discontent. Give them a job. Give them something to do, but there's one caution, and I thought he made a good point. He said, be careful. Petty jobs create petty conflicts. You give somebody a job to do, and it's not perceived as important, and they'll start trying to make it important, and here we go again. So try to make it meaningful and try to make it fit the person, but do try to employ people. They're less likely to cause you troubles. And the next point cannot be overemphasized, and it's where I think we make a lot of our mistakes. Reinforce productive members. Okay, you look around your congregation, you've got certain people in that group that are productive. He tells us to give honor to those who minister, not to those who demand it. It was refreshing to hear him indicate that there are people who demand to be honored. They try to figure out ways to have their name mentioned or to be in some way prominent among the congregation. He says, don't worry about people demanding it. Give honor to those people who serve other people. Hold them up before the congregation. Reinforce them. Encourage them. Reward them, and reward them publicly. He made the point, and I know it's very true, and I've heard enough of it over the years to be able to verify it. He says, church members notice who the minister spends his time with. And they notice it, and it registers. Who do you spend your time with? They will lose respect for you if squeaky wheels or troublesome people dominate your time, and it can happen so easy. They can just absorb all of your time. They can tie you up in knots, and here you are with them all the time. Whereas they will see that, and almost subconsciously say, well, if I cause trouble, I will get attention. That's one of the reasons why I'm a little bit slow to jump out of Tyler and fly out or drive out to an area that's having a problem. I don't want anybody to get the message that if we have trouble, we can get a visit from Tyler. I want to give a visit in Tyler to a place that's growing and developing and that's doing well. That's where I want to go. Just showed up down here in Woodruff, and it was good to go to those people and to reinforce those people because they're working hard and they're doing a good job down there. That's where I need to give my attention. And I don't want the message to be out, that it's the squeaky wheels or somebody that might have a problem that's going to get the attention. The attention we need to give, and the same thing is true in the local church. Spend your time with your productive people and reinforce those people and honor those people. And you'll be surprised at the results that will get. And some of these squeaky wheels, you just let them squeak, They're going to anyway. So reinforce your productive people. The respected people in the congregation are not the self-appointed critics. They're the doers. Who do the people respect? Well, they respect the people who do things. And these are the people that we must encourage. And we must encourage initiative among those talented and doers among our congregation. And don't ever get confused. A lot of times we sometimes may think some of the overactive people are dragons. They really aren't. They really aren't. They're just active, intelligent, initiative-ridden people. They've got to be doing, and they're the people you need to help and encourage and direct and use them. That's what they're pleading with. They say, use me, here I am, I want to do something. Well, let them do it. Don't get in their way. Those aren't your dragons. Those aren't the ones that are going to cause you your trouble. The next point he mentioned was to honor the Christ that is present in the church. Nice way of putting it. The way I put it to you is respect and trust the brethren. And one thing I have learned is that anybody who looks at the church as pigs and chickens and sheep and dumb sheep is not going to be effective in working with those people. The people of God have God's Holy Spirit, and we have got to respect that Holy Spirit in God's people. And we've got to trust the church. And it comes all the way down to the end. They may make some mistakes, and they may fall down a few times, but when it comes all out at the end, they will still be there. And they'll still be doing God's will if you give them half a chance to do it and give them the honor that they deserve for doing it. Next, don't push authority. If you do, you'll lose it. The only authority really you have anyway is what the people grant to you. I could try to grant it to you. I could try to bestow it upon you, but it will not buy you anything. If you can't win their respect, and if you can't gain that government that people grant to you to govern them, you will be helpless in the long run, I promise you. So you just might as well, if you're going to be in the ministry, settle it in your mind that you are going to have to earn your way, and that whatever authority you have over the people will have to be earned, and they will have to grant it to you. We have set up our structure that way, and it's the only way to work because it's the only way to work within the way people work. And that is, they have got to ask and petition that you be appointed as their minister. And in so doing, they grant to you considerable authority in the church. And when you have it, don't push it. Don't push it. Because the more you push it, the less of it you will have, and eventually, you won't have any at all. And the Church of God International is structured in such a way that no sanctions will really ever be taken against people who simply no longer refuse to accept the authority of a given minister. So that's the way it's set up. I didn't do it. The Ministerial Council did it. The ministry as a whole did it, as a matter of fact, all the way back to 1979. And that is what we're stuck with, and that's what we will live with or die with in the Church of God International. Or I guess if we don't like it, we can go back to the Worldwide Church of God. Bite your tongue. Try your best also to create an atmosphere of trust with your council. If you trust them, they're going to be more likely to trust you, and you have really got to build that mutual trust. It's got to be a matter of consultation, of give and take, of back and forth, and being able to really work with those people. Do your best to build a strong council. You've got a chance. We gave it to you. We gave you the right to get up there and make a speech before the council is elected. Nobody else has that right in church. So if you don't do your job of really explaining to the people, not trying to stack the council, but making sure they know that you're to select council members for their spiritual qualifications, as opposed to money or clout or longevity in the corporation or strong personalities, then you have only yourself to blame in the process. Be careful also about the tendency for people to select the good old boy. Tell them, ahead of time. Not right at the last minute when you're trying to stack the council or you're already in trouble. Try to educate your people as to the importance and the responsibility that goes with, pardon me for saying the dirty word, the democratic process. There's an enormous responsibility that comes on their shoulders, and it's your obligation to be sure they understand it. But remember, any effort you make to stack the council, to stack it, will backfire. Just don't let that one get away from you. We've come to the end of another segment of the tape, so let's take another, you've been very good about this, by the way, another 5-minute break. Look at your watch, and let's then come back for the next portion.